Shut up and sit down.
The mining and tourist town of Coober Pedy is the last remaining example of a gold rush town left in Australia. It's a very unique place full of unique people, with piles of rubble spread out all over the town. The search for opals originally drove the formation of this town, but when you look closely at the successful services still available, tourism is now fueling the economy with access to places like Lake Eyre. As a town in the middle of the desert full of wandering souls, it does remind me of places like Las Vegas, if only it had casinos and nightclubs. And I'm somewhat surprised that there aren't more massage parlours and other adult services throughout the town, as I saw very little businesses trying to make money off the miners. The town has a good dozen opal stores, and about a quarter of those are owned by the miners selling their own rocks, but most look like they're just selling pre-purchased jewellery imported from China. There are a handful of jewellers selling their own creations, but most look like to be just selling souvenirs to the tourists. The environment looks very similar to the Pilbara, and it's scary to think that this landscape stretches all the way to the northern parts of WA. The scenery also reminds me of Mars, as captured by NASA's Curiosity rover. It's a hot, dry, tough, unforgiving country, where only those who have little other places to be are here trying to eke out a living looking for the fire and the stone. After my experience crossing the top end, particularly the hops between Cairns and Darwin, I decided to head straight across the Nullarbor in one go. The only large town I knew of in the region was Port Augusta, and wanting to visit Lake Eyre and Coober Pedy, I used Google Maps to plot a course between Esperance in Western Australia, which worked out to be about 2,000 kilometres. I thought that was doable in about 2 days, but I didn't notice that Google had found a shortcut along a dirt road between Ayres and Stewart highways. Watching the weather before I left, I was aware of a storm cell that was sweeping through the south of the country. I started monitoring the status of the dirt roads in South Australia over the internet. It didn't look good, as the road was already closed to all but four-wheel drives without towing, which meant the roads were already wet. Leaving Esperance still hopeful that I could outrun the storm, and the weather app predicted rain about midday. But as the rain had already started before I left, I was already in full wet weather winter gear. Still hopeful that I could at least head east faster than the wind could blow, I headed out. The day started improving as I headed inland towards Northman, and the only complaint was the return of the monotonous long straights of WA and the fear that my rear tyre would once square off again. Heading out down the Ayres Highway, I saw the return of the rain and the official longest straight in Australia at nearly 150 kilometres long. I kept slaloming down the straights even though the oncoming traffic could see me a good 5 to 10 kilometres down the road. Some of those drivers were not sure what I was doing and were quite obviously hesitant when it came time to passing me, and were keeping as far left as possible. The wet weather and the road trains made the end of the day quite unpleasant, but some of the people were having a far worse day than I. Riding around lunchtime, I started running into those old timers on the old classics on the 2022 Cannonball Run, who I ran into at Esperance the day before. The rain, the road trains, the long straights just kept coming, although by the end of the day I had started drying out a bit and my hopes about running the storm looked a bit more promising. Being chased by the lightning from the storm, I got to the South Australian border just before dark, and I was still feeling strong even after a whole day's riding. I checked into the motel, I took off my riding gear and got something to eat just before heading back to my room. I heard a loud thunderclap and I checked the South Australian Outback Roads website and my hopes were being dashed. The alternative path along the bitumen was an additional 450 kilometres longer. I knew that I couldn't complete the rest of the hop in one day, so I gave in and booked a room at Port Augusta, turning the 2-day trip into 3. With another near 1,000 kilometre day and many things to stop and see along the Great Australian Bight, I decided to leave early in the hope that I could catch an awesome sunrise. The weather gods were still not smiling at me, but I was happy to know that I made the effort and I wasn't going to die wandering. I did manage to get some fairly spectacular footage of the coastline, although I had no idea if the sun had actually risen or not. There are 3 public scenic lookouts along the route, and the second lookout was the most famous. If I had planned it better, I would have gotten to the second lookout to try capturing the sunrise, as the cliff faces would have lined up better. I'm not going to be too hard on myself, as you don't know these things until you get there and try. I pulled out the drone in an effort to capture the perfect image, but the wind was still quite strong and I was worried that I'd end up losing it. The last of the public lookouts along the Bright was blinded by the glare. The final stop was a private lookout called the Head of the Bright, and at the time I didn't realise that this was the end of the Bright for me, and I just completed the trip across the Nullarbor. In a little over 1,000 kilometres the wheat farms had returned. Compared to the month-long journey across the top end, the Nullarbor was so much easier. I can understand why there are so many more motorcyclists down this end of the country than there is up north. The South Australian roads are a horror show. My first impressions of the change in the road rules were that the road trains were travelling at the same speed as everybody else, and with no overtaking lanes that allowed them to overtake slower moving traffic safely. I also had difficulty understanding the difference markers, with their strange numbering patterns compared to everywhere else in the country. I pulled over to the side of the road to have a close look and I discovered why. And without the well-defined next service signs that are like in WA, I started running out of fuel, and I finally found a petrol station which was closed at 4 p.m. Just my first day into South Australia, and I found that this place was really starting to bug me. Over the border, the monotonous long straights and the rain didn't dissipate, and for the first time ever, I started to catch myself yawning. Riding through Irons Knob, I couldn't help noticing the similarities between this place and the Pilbara, and realising that Australia is just made up a little more than iron ore and sand. Making it to Port Augusta just before total darkness, I couldn't help but pull over to the side of the road and take some pictures of the sunset. At just before 8 p.m. local time, I was lucky to find an open takeaway joint to get a burger and chips just before checking into the trailer park. Day 3 started out pretty much like day 1 and day 2 had done before, in full wet weather gear and little sunshine. But this time there was a lot of other people on the roads having a far worse day than I. There was a number of road trains that had pulled into parking bays the night before and didn't realise that the rain would turn the dirt in the mud. I got to Gundaroo for lunch and refuelled. The place was totally washed out. I was lucky that there was 2 petrol stations as one had water in the tank. With all the commotions, the roadhouse didn't even bother opening for lunch. I had to rely on the last 2 jelly snakes to get me through the day. Some of the highlights of the day was that I could see some of the inland lakes that were now full of water. The creeks were all running and the inland lagoon was once again surrounded by water and not just white salt flakes. Lake Hart was full of water, although you couldn't really notice it from this distance. I stopped to take some photos and walked over a dirt access trail and realised just how lucky I was to have skipped the dirt roads. I got to see a young mob of emus protected by their father, and with a strong tailwind I saved about 20% on fuel. I got to ride through Woomera and I got to Coober Pedy while being very sore and tired, but without having a bad day as so many others were having around me. Staying in the underground motel is a bit different from the experience from Airbnb as I'm used to. It's pretty much the same, just sharing it with 6 other rooms. It's interesting to see that there's very little mould on the walls. I'm guessing that the rocks are impermeable and no moisture at all can dribble through them. I don't know if it's any cooler during the summer month when it's over 40 degrees, as there are still plenty of standard dwellings around town. It seems that there are only a lucky few who can afford to dig their homes into the side of a hill. The chain continues stretching, and I've now adjusted it to the fullest extent. I continue spraying WD-40 in a desperate attempt to slow down the deterioration. I'm guessing that if I constantly lubricated the self-lubricating chain, I wouldn't be having this problem. 20/20 hindsight. I'm still confident of getting the last 1,000 odd kilometres through the Flinders ranges and down to Adelaide though. The rear tyre is doing much better after nearly 2.5 megametres of sailing down those long straights. If only I'd done that over the top end, I'm guessing I wouldn't have needed to make it all the way down to Perth with the rear tyre I picked up at the Sunshine Coast and would not have needed to replace it while at Broome. Otherwise the bike is fairly dirty after riding 3 days in the rain. My rain gear has totally disintegrated with all that use as it was never designed to be worn for so long. I guess I'll need to pick up some new gear while in Adelaide, as I imagine I'll need it while riding through Tasmania. No Vodafone, but the accommodation has free Wi-Fi, so I don't need to use the Starlink dish here either. Telstra has worked out here, so a prepaid SIM would have been a much better choice for this trip. So far on this trip, I've visited 4 mining towns: Weipa, Mount Isa, Karratha and now Coober Pedy. The first 3 were all dominated by large mining companies, but here in Coober Pedy, it's a free-for-all, just a bunch of small people just doing their thing. I'm surprised that no company has come to dominate the opal production or distribution, just a bunch of individuals digging in the desert keeping themselves quiet. I remember as a kid the boy next door once showed me a box of opals. He told me that they were very expensive. I don't know if the stones were very large or my hands were very small. I wasn't able to find anything here that resembled that memory. Like with other mining towns, Coober Pedy has a sizable indigenous population and an active police force. But unlike the Aboriginal centres like Tennant Creek, where all the shops are behind grated windows and most of the homes are behind 6-foot fences, Coober Pedy I haven't seen any barbed wire or police cameras on the streets. I can't understand the anger in the Northern Territory and the Northern WA. But on a positive side, after several weeks in temperatures below 20 degrees, it's nice to be back in the warmth. Next up is back to Port Augusta and the Flinders Ranges. I originally wanted to head back through Lake Eyre and down the Outback Highway, but again the dirt roads are all closed, and with more rain predicted, I'm not too hopeful that the roads will dry out in time. Hopefully the chain will have enough in it to head back to Port Augustus and back up again. If I had my time again, I wouldn't have planned such a long hop and would have broken up the trip into two by staying a week at Ceduna. And maybe then I would have missed all this rain while still seeing this desert turn green. So thanks for following my adventures around Australia. Remember to go out there and do something to enjoy your day.